so grateful, Gregg, to have you back. This is such a gift. Wow, I'm like literally feeling tears. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for being here. We're going to dive in, and I'm just thank you for making the time and your gracious, heart-centered energy and wisdom.
Julie, thank you so much. Thank you for those. I'm a Cancerian male, and if I cry, my voice will change, and it messes up the whole interview. So I want to thank you for your trust in sharing me with your community. But I think your community is my family as well. So I'm just I'm honored to share this virtual stage with you. And there's so many places that we could go, so many things that we could touch upon today, and I'm gonna trust. I said off camera, this is a dance, and I'm really happy for the lady to lead. So I'm going to follow your lead in this dance. So let's see where we go.
We're just going to I love, this is my favorite kind of conversation where we're like, I don't know, who knows? We'll see where we go. We're going to go. I do think the first area that I want to talk about this whole realm of consciousness and potentiality. Like what are you seeing? I know you're an expert in this. And you can start anywhere you want. I'm going to just open with a big old question about consciousness and the shift on our globe and potentiality, Gregg, and let you have a party.
Well, thank you, Julie. I'm a student just like you, and I'm always learning. I think I'm a good listener, and I have made a conscious effort to become a better listener, because there's a world speaking to us right now. There's a world speaking to us about what it is that's happening, and I'm just going to say to our viewers, it's no secret that we're living a time of extremes. I mean, that can't be a secret to anyone, from climate change to social change to buckling and collapsing financial systems. And the wars, 22 wars are being waged on our planet right now. We hear about one or two in the media. 22 wars are happening right now. This isn't business as usual, and it is difficult sometimes to stay focused on our lives. It's difficult to stay optimistic. This is the 43rd year I've done this work in one form or another, and I've been blessed to travel into some of the most remote, isolated, pristine, magnificent, beautiful places remaining in the world today. Archaeological sites of temples and the remains of ancient civilizations, to understand what it is that they knew that we may have forgotten, or maybe we never knew about our time. And I used to think it was for the temples and for the archaeology. And what I discovered, Julie, very quickly, is it was more about the people, the indigenous people that preserve that wisdom, that still live at those places. And meeting with them and their perspective. And they have always said that we would live this time in history, where we would live a time of the convergence of cycles that would change our planet. They said, you won't recognize your nations, you won't recognize your borders, you won't recognize your own neighborhood, you won't recognize your life. And they've said that for over 40 years. 1986 was the first trip that I made. And largely those ideas have been discounted until recently. I was doing a radio interview with a New York DJ who I interviewed with in 2012, the craziness around 2012. And in 2012, he said, oh yeah, 2012, when are all these changes you're talking about going to happen? And then I interviewed with him earlier this year, or late last year. And he said, when are these changes going to stop? So he's acknowledging that we are, living this very unique time. So for me, there are so many layers that we can go into about what is happening and what's changing. And we can talk about climate change, social change, financial change. We can talk all of those things, and they're important. And they need to be discussed with kindness so that we can find resolution. But ultimately, Julie, on a deep level, there is a battle that is playing out for our thoughts, for our beliefs, what we believe to be true about ourselves and our world and where we come from. There's a battle for our very humanness. Our very humanness is on the line because there are proposals to replace our natural biology with synthetic technology with chips in the brain, sensors under the skin, chemicals in the blood. And the reason this is important is because it reveals the deepest battle of all. This will answer the question about consciousness.
Mm.
It is through our humanness that we have access to what I'll call our divinity. And then I'll define this. The divine nature of what it means to be human. Now, a lot of people, when I say this in a live audience, they think we're talking about religion because divinity has been linked with religion. But if you look at the definition, this is fascinating. Divinity has nothing to do with religion. What the definition is, divinity is our ability to transcend perceived human limitations, not just to survive, but to transcend, to thrive in the presence of the limits, and they may not even be real, perceived. They're the limitations that we've been programmed to accept about our abilities, our limited abilities, or our powerlessness. So divinity is about accessing that part of ourself that often is veiled by the fear of all of the extremes I'm talking about. So we can focus, spend your life focusing on climate change or on collapsing financial and economic systems. It's all important. On society, on social, on politics, it's all important. However, ultimately, those are the diversions that keep us from accessing, I think, the real goal of what this time in our lives is all about. And it's our ability to become, maybe for the first time, fully human. We may not even know what it means to be fully human in our lives because at least 3 generations now, we've been told, and we're still teaching our kids this in school today, we've been told that by biology, our carbon biology is flawed, that we are flawed by our very nature. And among those flaws are emotion, human emotion, they say when they teach this in the schools. And there are scientists that believe this. Human emotion clouds our ability to think clearly and to make good decisions. They say that human intimacy, the intimacy between a man and a woman that creates a new life, is imperfect because you never know the outcome. And you don't know what that child is going to be like. Eye color, hair color, fast twitch muscles for athletics or IQ. You don't know any of that. So here's where I'm going with this. We've been conditioned to believe that we are powerless victims, and as victims that we need a savior, and our savior is being touted as technology. So technology is being dangled out there to entice us to replace our humanness. And this is where science and consciousness are really coming together in a very interesting way, because to have artificial intelligence, we have to define what is consciousness. What is intelligence? What is sentience? Is AI a sentient form of life? We've got to define all of those things. So what's happening, Julie, is we're in the process of this tremendous shift on the planet and in our lives. In the midst of that process, we are developing these technologies, and we cannot complete that development until we understand ourselves. To understand, if we want to build real AI, and I'll define what I mean by that in just a minute, but if we want to build actual intelligence and not just a program that mimics some predetermined answers, if we want actual intelligence, we can't do that until we understand our consciousness, our intelligence. And this is, divinity plays a very powerful role in this. Divinity, our ability to transcend perceived human limitations. This is the part of us that's ageless, it's timeless. We all have divinity. Sometimes we veil that divinity from our access. We do it in one of 3 ways. We can deny our own divinity. We have free will. We can deny that we are anything special. And I know people in my family that do that, in my community. That's number 1. Number 2, we can be conditioned out of our divinity by our family, by society, by mainstream media, by what we teach in the classroom, the way we think about ourselves. We can be conditioned to deny our divinity. And number three, through technology. When we replace our natural biology with synthetics, synthetic tissue, synthetic, and I just want to be clear, there are times when we need maybe an artificial heart or an artificial kidney or an artificial hip or a knee, and that's not what I'm talking about. There is a movement to replace our entire bodies with synthetic material and preserve only the brain for immortality. That is a movement that is afoot right now. Here's why this is a problem. It is the DNA in our bodies, the unique formula of DNA in our bodies, that is the antenna that tunes us to our divinity in the field. The divinity isn't in here. We access that divinity through the gift of the biology that we were given when we appeared 200,000 years ago. You take away the DNA or you alter the DNA, and there are attempts to do that as well. And we no longer, it's like turning the dial on a radio. Now you lose the station that holds your divinity. So when we give our biology away, when we begin to replace our natural abilities with artificial technology, our abilities begin to atrophy. The neurons that we once used may not develop because a chip is doing it for us, and the body says you don't need that anymore. So there are layers and layers and layers of things happening. Ultimately, I think we are being tested. We're being pushed to the edge of who we believe we are in lieu of accessing the deep truth of our existence and what our divinity is really all about. Our intuition is an aspect of our divinity, our imagination, our creativity. When we express something deep within us in this physical realm and we're reaching to find that something, that's our divinity. That's what I'm talking about. And the reason it's important is because when we have a clear connection with our divinity, we are less vulnerable to fear. We are less vulnerable to the fear of the uncertain world that we find ourselves in. It's still out there. It doesn't change the world. It changes the way we respond to the world. We are less vulnerable to the fear, and that means we are less vulnerable to the agenda and the ideas that other people have about what our lives should look like and what our world should look like. Another way of saying that is when our divinity is veiled, when we feel separate from our divinity, we feel lost and we feel powerless. And then we become more vulnerable, more susceptible to other people's ideas because we are lost. We don't know who we are. So consciousness is what underlies all of this. Consciousness is the fertile field within which our divinity exists. Divinity is an aspect of consciousness. You can think of consciousness as the container and our divinity as a vessel within that container. So where I see things happening, that was a long answer to a short question, but what I see happening is that people all over the world, this just isn't in America or in my community, we are undergoing change faster than we've ever undergone change in a single lifetime. And for some people, it is more change than they can really accept because they've never been given the tools to embrace the resilience of change. And so what's happening is it's forcing people to come to a deeper understanding of who they are and what their relationship is with their own bodies when it comes to the immune system, for sure, with the people under their roofs that they share everyday life with, as belief systems clash over the family dinner table and in the living room, after dinner. We share a house, we share blood, we have, common ancestors, and we could not be thinking more differently. And that pushes us to come to terms with who we are and what's true in our lives. And then now the whole conversation of AI and the role that we are going to allow AI to play in our society and in our personal lives. we can't answer that question until we know who we are. How much of ourselves are we going to give away to the technology? How much of ourselves are we going to give away to AI? We can't answer that until we know who we are and what we're giving away.
I really appreciate I love that you dove into the divinity aspect. And to me, what's coming up is really to get how sacred this is, the fact that we, with the DNA that we have, with the connection that's possible, that we have an ability to connect. I love what you said. I love how you said this, the consciousness in the fertile field, that the divinity is that fertile field which our consciousness exists. And I think, for those listening who are up against, what do I believe? And there's fear, and fear can be so disempowering. It can affect the immune system. I mean, I won't get into my story with it, but I can say that I know, as somebody who breathes and lives this, I found myself kind of in this like fear bug, Greg, where I was like, what is happening? I was waking up in the middle of the night, like with fear thoughts, really scared. And I must say, I feel like anyone listening, anyone here, our family, we chose to be here at this time. This is an extraordinary time, as you said. And I think for those listening, just where to start with, I think, because it's that self to symphony, like how do we as individuals, I know anyone listening wants to be their best self, wants to connect with their divinity. I think of that as your U.S. you. Honestly, that's what I mean by that. It's your connection to the divine. It's your intuition. Where do we start? Especially, and that's a big question, but health, emotions, programming that we've been subjected to. Like, you can just go anywhere you want with that, but I just keep hearing people like, where do I begin, Greg?
Yeah, it's a good question. So now I'm going to tie back into the foundation that we just created together.
Yeah.
There is a battle. It's an ancient battle that began the moment humans appeared on this earth. And we all know this. We sense this. There's a fundamental battle between good and evil, between light and dark. And it has played out over eons in many different ways through society and through technology and the choices that we make. It's playing out right now. And this battle, the way that we win this battle is by not fighting. If we engage in the fight, we succumb to and fall into the ancient trap that keeps us stuck in this battle. The way that you win this battle is by becoming the best version of yourself, by accessing and embracing your divinity. And here's the reason, because it is through our divinity that we transcend the fear. If we don't have access to the divine nature of our being, and we don't know, it's what I call a soul compass. If we don't know with rock solid certainty who we are as we walk down the streets on this beautiful planet we live on, if we don't know who we are, it's very easy to succumb to the fear of the uncertainty of incoming. And we are inundated with media. And I have to say, Julie, unfortunately, it's across the board. I used to believe that there were forms of media, PBS, NPR, CNN. I used to think they were more objective, and now I know that's not true. And the reason is because they're different networks, but they are owned by just a handful of corporations that have an agenda. And I have to say that as a scientist, I'm a degreed geologist with a strong background in life sciences, math, physics, computer science, archaeology, and astronomy. And I say that because it's that multidisciplinary background that allows me to stay current with new discoveries that are being published in these very obscure technical journals. And those discoveries support, the evidence in those discoveries supports what I'm saying is there is a movement to feed us information so that we make the choices that direct us to support other people's ideas and other people's agendas. People want to know more about that. It's actually called fifth generational warfare is the term that's used. It's not a kinetic war. It's not about what it all happens in the mind and the heart. And it's very sophisticated. And it goes two ways. And the way that we use that is that we become the best version of ourselves. And when we have that, we are no longer bound by the shackles of the fear that keep us feeling small and insignificant and powerless victims in the world. It empowers us, it frees us to love. And when we love fearlessly, when we love ourselves without reservation, many people are afraid to fully love themselves because they've been led to believe it's not safe. And if you cannot love yourself fully, it's very difficult then when you reach inside because you have someone else in your life that you truly want to love and you reach inside for the love to give to them. If you don't have it for yourself, your vessel is not as full as you'd like for it to be. There are entire teachings about that in the ancient traditions. When we embrace our divinity, it frees us to love ourselves and to love others. And in the presence of that love, we are no longer subject to the fear. It doesn't change what's happening. We can watch an economic system collapse. It needs to. It's broken. It's corrupt. We can watch social change because that's where we are right now. And we can watch all of these things happen, but because our soul compass is strong, we know that we are watching the process rather than victims of the process. Because when you begin to, there are places, Julie, where the words fail and people just have to live this truth. When we embrace our divinity, here's what happens. We begin to see the world differently. Now, and I'm going to offer a tool to do this, by the way, before we leave here today. But when we embrace our divinity, we begin to see the world differently. And through that lens, number one, we change the chemistry in our bodies, then that's important. But we are not frightened by the things that may frighten people around us, because we know with absolute certainty who we are in the world. And this is something that's not taught in the schools. We are the product of at least 3 generations of dumbing down our young people. Most young people don't have an inkling of understanding about their immune system and how it works. They don't have an inkling of understanding about the delicate, highly advanced technological, soft technology that they call their bodies. They've been taught that their bodies are flawed because they are human. And because of that, they lose respect for their bodies and how they treat their bodies, what they put into their bodies. Are much more willing to imbibe in chemicals and in processes that actually steal life away from them rather than supporting that life, because they've never been given a reason not to, Julie. And in that way, the education system has failed for at least 3 generations, at least 3. And because of that, we now have a population global, not just in the West, that has become more vulnerable to other people's ideas, competing ideas based upon competing agendas. And that makes for a crazy world. It's a world that looks very crazy. In my first public speaking I ever did was at the Open Door Bookstore in 1986 in Denver, Colorado. They just closed right before COVID. They closed. And it was during that time that a man I admired tremendously he was still in the world, and he passed not long after. His name was Buckminster Fuller. And if our viewers don't know who he is, you probably know him because he created the architecture based upon the geodesic dome. That's what most people know. But if you study his life, he was a very deep thinking philosopher, a visionary way ahead of his time. And what he said once, Julie, and this has stayed with me all my life, he said, "You'll never change the world by fighting against the things you don't like." He said, if you want to change the world, find a new way that makes the old way obsolete, and people will follow the new way, and the old way falls away. And I think that's true in our lives right now. If we spend our time fighting against all the things that we don't like, what we're doing is we're actually engaging in what keeps on a level that keeps us stuck in this ancient battle. The way to win this battle is to find the new way, and people will follow the ways that work better, whether it's new ways of energy, new ways of feeding our families, new ways of society, whatever it is. Find a new way, and the old ways fall away. And I think we're seeing this happen in our lives. Now, I'll give you a perfect example is war. the idea of war is just horrific. And what we're finding now, I mean, what would happen if they throw a war and nobody comes? Like, what if you throw a party and nobody shows up? What if you throw a war and nobody shows up? I have talked to young people, military people, who no longer feel good about hurting another person who is not threatening them. It's a very, very different concept. If you're attacked, that's one thing, but to go and to hurt our global family, to hurt our brothers and sisters, there's a reluctance to do that now. I could see a time when young people refuse to fight and we walk away from war as a way to solve our problems. I could see that happening in this lifetime because of where I think we're going to get really close to some really dark experiences. And I think we'll have to get close to walk away from it. But that tells me, you asked me in the beginning of this conversation, shifts in consciousness, that wouldn't have happened during World War II, or it wouldn't have happened in the 50s or the 60s or during the Cold War. So I'm seeing a shift, in that way. So we find a new way that makes the old ways obsolete. So where that comes down to a practical reality in our lives today, we are being pushed, and I have to use that word. We're not being invited. We're being pushed into a world called a reset, a very different world than what we've lived in the past. And we're being pushed into a world where we live in compact, centralized cities rather than dispersed in rural areas. We're being pushed into centralization of everything, from finances, CBDC, centralized digital currencies, to centralized sources of food, centralized sources of energy, centralized sources of banking and finance and living. In any time, Julie, that is not a good way to live. In a time of extremes, it's the worst way. The last thing you want is centralization. What we want is what our indigenous ancestors have always taught us. It is localized living where we have localized sources of food, localized sources of energy that make sense for that locality, localized sources of economy and finance, localized sources of water, not centralized through supply chains that are vulnerable and can break down and hurt many people. When you live locally, you are stronger as an individual and stronger as a community. And through that, you can help other people when they're having problems because you've taken care of yourself in a way that reflects the natural world. Nature is localized. Nature is not centralized.
I am just the thing that I wanted to highlight, and then I would love for you you just keep going, Greg, because the practices I can tell will be so helpful. It absolutely makes sense with the localized living. It makes sense on every level to me. The thing I actually want to highlight that you said that I think is so crucial, and I don't want this to get overlooked by anybody, is you said it a couple times. The way we win is not by fighting.
Yeah.
And that can be translated in a lot of ways, meaning what I heard underneath that is you said love fearlessly, and putting that into action. I've just, as someone who I've talked a lot about A Course in Miracles, I've been working through that, and it's a daily practice on this, right? Getting rid of grievances and judgments and love. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is no joke. This starts with ourselves. Stop fighting ourselves. Stop fighting with this goes from micro to macro. So when you said that, I had like goosebumps over my entire body, because it's like you said, have a war that no one shows up to, like a party that no one comes to. So I just wanted to say that what you just said, there's so much here. That's really big. And that can be a good place for people to start, I think, is, okay, how do I stop?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And just to be really clear, I mean, it's easy to have these conversations and go to extremes because they are very primal. They touch very primal elements of our being.
Yeah.
We all know there are times that we have to fight. We all know that. And we've all seen that in World War II and what was happening in Europe.
Yeah.
If we wanted to stop what was happening, we had to defend what we believed in. But the point is, to get to the point where you've got to fight, you've already got to compromise and give in so much of yourself. There are so many places where that war could have been prevented if people had claimed their sovereignty and if they had claimed their divinity. They didn't
Yeah.
do it because they were conditioned not to, Julie.
Yeah.
And so when it reached the point that it did where all of Europe was threatened with a way of life and with atrocities, we had to fight. And there's a warrior within every one of us. You
Yeah.
know, we would fight for our loved ones, for our families. We'd fight for our planet if we ever had to do that. So it's not that we never do. What I'm saying is, Buckminster Fuller, if you want to win, to change the world, is what he said, you find a
Mm.
new way. Now, the
Yeah.
science supports everything you just said, Julie, and I know you and I have talked about this in past conversations, and you've had some other people on, I believe, who probably alluded to this. The Institute of Heart Math, the pioneering research center in Northern California that is exploring the human relationship, our relationship to the earth and beyond in non-conventional ways, but they're very, very scientific ways. They now have documented, and it's in peer-reviewed research, so this isn't hearsay, and it's not conspiracy, and it's not my theory. This is peer-reviewed research. There's a field. There's an energetic field that underlies all of existence. We've got sensors right now, 40 sensors on different continents through under the auspices of Princeton University, feeding back to a computer in Southern California, as well as, I believe, 6 or 7 sensors directly measuring this field, also feeding back to the HeartMath central server. And what it tells us very clearly is we can see when there are shifts, when human consciousness shifts, it impacts energetically these fields, and the sensors can pick that up, send it back to computers, and it can be plotted. If you want to know more about this, go to the www.heartmath, HEARTMATH, two words, or two words put together as one word, heartmath.org, and look at the research. So the reason I'm saying this is what the research has shown, Julie, is this field, the energetic states of this field, the field only knows one of 2 energetic states. That's it. It
Mm.
either knows coherence or it knows chaos. That's it.
Mm.
So we can be as well-intentioned as we want when we go, not you and me, but when our community, when they march angrily in the streets and destroy property and burn buildings, protesting something they feel justified in protesting, you have to ask, what are you feeding the field? Are you feeding the field coherence, or are you feeding the field chaos? And the more chaos we put into the field, it actually stimulates greater degrees of the chaos that we say we want to heal. So that's the reason that's the scientific reason why anger and hate expressed in violence actually feeds the field, this chaos. And one of the things that we can ask ourselves and say, okay, in this moment, what am I feeding the field? And if I'm feeding the field chaos, don't judge it. You recognize it. You say, okay, yeah, there's some chaos I'm putting in the field. Now, how do I go about shifting that? And I'd like to offer something to support the answer to that, if you're okay with that. Are you okay on time? Are we good on time?
Oh, we're doing fantastic. And I was just, you're literally teeing up. I was like, please, Greg, share with us. Because I can hear, like,
Yeah.
I can hear people listening saying, all right, so how do we do that?
Well,
Absolutely.
one of the things we can do, and I won't do it here because we've done it. You and I have done this in the past, and it is in so many videos, is creating the coherence
Yeah.
between the heart and the brain. Heart, brain, coherence, 3 steps: shift the focus, shift the breath, shift the feelings. It's on my YouTube videos. It's on the Heart Math channel. It's on Julie's past podcast. So check Julie's past podcast with Gregg Braden,
Yes.
and you'll see it. But sometimes it may not be practical to
Right.
go into that heart meditation. And when it's not, there are other things that you can do. And so So I like to share practice. I do also on a daily basis. And I'm going to preface this with a discussion of the power of beauty. Uh, Beauty has always played a very significant role in my life. When I left the corporations, I left academia and the corporations after I was the first tech ops manager at Cisco Systems. And I cashed out my stocks and I said, okay, where am I going to live? Am I going to live in another big, beautiful city where everything is really convenient? Or am I going to live somewhere where I wake up in the morning and I am surrounded with the magnificence of nature every single day? And the beauty of nature won out. So I actually ended up moving in the middle of nowhere, thinking I would never travel, to what used to be a Waldorf school in northern New Mexico, built in 1888. It was a fixer-upper, and it's still being fixed up. I mean, almost 40 years later, I'm still fixing it. So the point is, beauty has played a powerful role in my life. And interestingly, here in northern New Mexico, we are surrounded by indigenous people. The Navajo live in the Four Corners area. And to the Navajo, who call themselves Diné, by the way, they don't call themselves Navajo. That's the English. But to the people that live there, they've always called themselves Diné. They've always embraced beauty as more than a peripheral aesthetic. It's more than something, you see a sunset and you say, okay, that's beautiful. They literally have seen beauty as a force of nature, in addition to the four forces of physics that are acknowledged. So physics says we have the electromagnetic force, the force of gravity, the strong and the weak nuclear force. The Diné say, yep, and there's one more. There is a fifth force that is beauty. It literally is a force in the universe, in the cosmos, and we are changed in the presence of beauty. And that's true. When we perceive beauty, we are changed biologically in the presence of beauty. Well, in the Diné traditions, in the ceremony, they actually have a very lengthy beauty prayer, and it's not practical to do on this podcast or in your daily life. However, a Diné artist years ago condensed that prayer into 3 phrases that are very practical, and I say these to myself every single day, and I have for decades now. And so what I'd like to do is share the beauty prayer. And by the way, his name was Shanto Biguet. Shanto Biguet, I want to honor him and give him credit, was the Diné artist that first made this available back in the 1980s. The beauty prayer, simply, the abbreviated version, simply states, the beauty that I live with, the beauty that I live by, the beauty upon which I base my life. Now, those are just words until you understand what they represent. The beauty that I live with invites us, Julie, to embrace the fact that the beauty is already present in all things. We don't have to make it. Our job is to find it, to seek out the beauty, even in the darkness, even in the horrible events, because they are part of God's creation. There has to be beauty in there somewhere. It may be a minuscule piece of what you're seeing. But Mother Teresa was a master at this. When I had my groups in India, the Sisters of Charity were the hospice organizations, and they would go out at 5 o'clock in the morning as the sun was rising, and they would search the streets for humans who had been cast out of their homes because they were sick. They were called the untouchables, and they were left in the streets to die. And Mother Teresa and the Sisters of Charity would search in Calcutta, in the stench and the dung in the gutters of the streets, and they would find these humans and they would take them back to the hospice and they would bathe them and put them in white gowns so they could have dignity in their lives for the last moments or hours of their life. And in the midst of that filth, in stench in the streets, Mother Teresa would see a daisy growing out of the dung. And in that daisy, she would find beauty in the horror of those streets. There's always a daisy somewhere in everything. Our job is to find it. And it's a shift in thinking to know that the beauty is already there. That's different than thinking we have to make it. So the beauty that I live with, the beauty that I live by invites us to allow the beauty that we have recognized to be the guideline in our lives, to expect beauty in all things, to expect beauty in the worst argument with our intimate partner, to expect the beauty in the disease that is a message to our bodies. Maybe the beauty is in us embracing the message. What is our body saying to us? So that's the beauty that I live by. The beauty upon which I base my life, I think this maybe is perhaps the most powerful. It invites us to allow the beauty to play a role more than this peripheral aesthetic. It invites us to bring beauty into our lives front and center as the foundation upon which everything in our lives is viewed. It becomes the lens through which we see everything that happens in the world around us. And I just have to say, this is one of those things people have to experience. When we do that, we are changed. Now, the scientists tell us that when we perceive through beauty, that we begin to build neural networks that become more sensitive and recognize beauty where it may not have been seen before. We actually develop a way to see beyond the darkness and to see that beauty. So the power of beauty in our lives, for me personally, when I see things, doesn't change what happens in the world. What it does, Julie, is empowers me to be more present for what is that's happening, so that I can make healthy choices and healthy decisions, whether it comes to my personal life, my body, it comes to my business, whether it comes to what I am sharing on a live stage, halfway around the world. So in addition to the coherence, the intentional coherence that we can create between our heart and our brain, beauty also creates coherence. And you're not necessarily going through all the steps. It's intuitive. It's an intuitive way of creating that coherence. So the beauty of everything that we're talking about is there is a scientific and a technological foundation, but we don't have to know any of it. What we know is that we are a highly advanced, technologically sophisticated, soft technology. We are not computer chips and AI. We're neurons and cell membranes, and we self-regulate through thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, and focus. And that's all we need to know. Our ancestors did it really, really well. You can dive into the tech if you want it, but some people aren't interested in that. They just want to know how to get through the day. And so I'm going to invite our global family that's watching, the millions and millions of people that are watching you right now. I'm going to invite them to invite beauty into their lives. So look right in the camera, and I'm going to say, my brothers and sisters, we're going through a tough time, big change in the world, but we're wired for times just like this if we allow our bodies to do what our bodies know how to do. And our bodies know how to be divine. Beauty is a foundation of our divinity. So I'm going to invite you to invite beauty into your life without fear. Don't be afraid to allow beauty to play a powerful, pivotal, foundational role in your life. Well, Julie, I want to thank you for the community that you've built around your work, your life, and this podcast. And we need you. We appreciate you. And I look forward to our next.
Likewise.